I'm Sam Rosenthal. I'm the founder and creative director of the game band. So my role on BlaseBall is I do overall creative direction and then a lot of the business development for the companies.
I'm Joel Clark. I'm the game design lead at the game band, designing the sim and more on BlaseBall. Yeah.
Stephen Bell. I'm a designer on BlaseBall, mainly narrative lead, narrative design.
So can you guys first establish for people who have no idea what it is? Because I watched like several videos and I'm still a little spotty on what exactly BlaseBall is. It's a sim kind of fantasy football or fantasy baseball simulator, correct?
Yeah, it's like fantasy baseball. BlaseBall is this absurdist horror take on baseball where you're playing as a fan and you're one of many fans, and all collectively you're watching these simulated games and betting fake money on them, and you're cashing in your earnings to get votes which allow you to change the universe of the game. And that plays out in different ways. It can be boosts for your team, it can be these more overarching decrees that change the big storyline. But it's a game that takes place on a week-by-week schedule, so there's something new and exciting every single week for fans to latch onto. So it's live in a way that most other games are not.
This game has a very unique sense of humor. You guys fiddle around, like you said, in fantasy, but players have like 11 fingers, 2 heads. There's different weather, but the weather is not normal weather. It's like solar eclipses and like raining cats and dogs. Like where do you guys come up with all this stuff? Like, it seems like you're throwing darts at a board, which is great.
Sam mentioned it's an absurdist game. Like, we started the game in the pandemic, and part of this was just an escape for us to just design the most absurd things possible to get our mind off of things, off of the tough times we were going through. But I don't know, we just ran with all the what ifs. Steven came in the early testing and said, what if an umpire incinerated a player all of a sudden? And we said, yes, that's the spirit of this game, and just have run with it ever since. It leans in, this is a very emergent narrative driven game. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times the emergent narratives produce very absurd outcomes. And so we lean into that and we run with it whenever possible.
Now, are all of you like big sports fans, or was this game made to kind of like satirize of sports aficionados, or like to make fun of sports aficionados a little bit?
A little bit of both, I guess. We're all sports fans. Sam and I, we often say, like, we initially came up with this idea at a Dodgers game where we were just talking about how you could change the rules of baseball, and how players could have water buckets on their head to balance playing too hard or something. For like mid-season trades, if you beat the Dodgers, you get Mookie Betts or something. And we revisited that later when we were concepting this game, that conversation. And so the idea of twisting a sport that we really love was very central to starting this game. Yeah,
we grew up playing sports. Like, we all play various fantasy leagues together. So it was just kind of a natural fit for us.
And you guys, how many times, just as a fun question, how many times have you guys seen BlaseBall and it wasn't enough? Whatever you, because the second this is being explained to me in tutorials online that I've looked at, I was just like, this reminds me of basketball, because all they did was take basketball and baseball and they combined it, and it was a really weird type of game that would not be interesting to watch, but certainly if it's parodying stuff, it gets really funny, especially with the psych outs.
I can't remember the last time I watched that. I was very young when I watched that. I wonder if it holds up, but yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of like us not only asking, what are rules that you can introduce to this game that everybody, or by and large, most people have some familiarity with, that could tweak it in interesting ways. But because the sim is kind of this emergent narrative engine, and because it's such a like Spartan text-based game, the possibility space is so large. We're not limited by needing to create art assets in we're not, things aren't rendered in like it's not MLB The Show where everything has to be in 3D. You know, we can kind of just like come up with an idea, quickly prototype it, and get it into the sim and see how it interacts with the other systems there. A lot of BlaseBall is just introducing simple systems and watching and stacking them atop one another to see the kind of chaos that emerges out of it.
You know, speaking of art assets, like what's to feel like seeing the community make assets for you and send them to you? That's got to be a really good feeling.
It is really cool. Go ahead, Sam.
Very cool. Same thing, same answer. We were so overwhelmed by all of the amazing work that the community was doing. You know, this game was a side project for us when it started. We were not expecting that much from it, other than like, we hope people like it. And we were just stunned to see, first of all, the people latch onto it, and then second off, people started making fan art out of these characters with, you know, ridiculous names that were just kind of stats on a screen. And then they took it even beyond that. You know, they started making music. Like, this is an album behind me from The Garages, a band that formed around BlaseBall, and they've done amazing work. They made a musical at one point. Like, there's so much around this game, and you know, ultimately, like, whenever you're making something, it's the best reward you could ask for, is to see that it inspired the people that ended up playing it.
Yeah, and I think like what the first, must have been like season 2 or 3. The first time we saw, you know, fan art come in as, you know, a fan's representation of one of the players was like when we really realized like, oh, this is maybe something here. And then it just kind of was a flood that you know, really bowled us over. But you know, there are art assets, right, in BlaseBall. There are entities that show up and interact with the fans. But you know, we always say that like how, you know, the players themselves are just names and funny stats and attributes. How you see them is, you know, as long as it, you know, isn't something that's just like disgusting and wildly offensive or something, is like totally valid, right? Like you kind of like your interpretation, you bring your headcanon to the game. That also like really, that's where kind of like a lot of the horror of BlaseBall comes in, because like the fans get very attached to certain names, to certain players, to their imagined headcanons of them. And then because BlaseBall is a horror game and it's run by what might be like a malevolent simulation, it just will randomly pull those players away or trap them in a peanut or do something horrific to them. And it, you know, you see the community react to that because they've invested, you know, they've created art assets of them. They've invested time and care into these, you know, silly names like Jessica Telephone or I don't know, Jalen Hot Dog Fingers.
Your game, your community remind me of another community my friend really likes called 1-900 Hot Dog. It's just it's a community of people that used to own Cracked magazine or something like that. So it's a very like abstract, like you said, abstract Discord and humor that they all like, and I'm sure they play your game on that Discord all the time. I'll ask them on Friday, but
yeah, I mean, there's a very like shit posty vibe to BlaseBall, if I can say that.
So I'm curious, like, you know, in real fantasy baseball, football, whatever, like, you know, stats change during the season. If a player that was really trash in the beginning starts hitting a lot of home runs or scoring a lot of first downs, or sorry, I don't know sports very well, so I hope I'm getting all these statistics right. And that changes in real time via the fantasy leagues, the official fantasy leagues. Now, how much manual tuning does your team have to do to keep up with that, or is the algorithm pretty on it with that stuff?
We keep hands off as much as possible, if not completely. So like we generally will set up a season ahead of time and tune some things, and then let the season run. And even if it descends into chaos, we're not going to put our finger on the scale to move the narrative in a direction or to fix the balance of things. If a team starts scoring 100 runs, great, like let them do so. So each season is a week, and we tune between seasons a little bit, but we're hands off otherwise.
Now this is a browser game. Are there any, if I'm correct, right? It is a browser game, or is it its own
browser game? But the next version of BlaseBall will also be an app too for iOS and Android.
Perfect, cool. So my question is that, like, are there any advantages or disadvantages to making a browser game in 2022 as opposed to a traditional experience? You mentioned that you were eventually making an app.
Yeah, so when we originally were conceiving like where BlaseBall is going to live, this was like in the heart of the pandemic. We're all completely isolated from each other, and a lot of that original inspiration to make a browser game came from just personal experiences. Like I was playing a lot of games with some friends of mine that don't usually like video games over Zoom, and they wanted to play like browser-based versions of board games and card games. So I thought that was really interesting because it was totally platform independent. They were down to just open up a browser tab. They already had a bunch open for work and everything anyway. So it felt like this is a really just approachable way to get a lot of people to check something out. And since BlazeBall is so out there, it's great to have such a low barrier to entry. You just have to go to the website and see if it's for you. Even an app has a bit of a higher point of entry than just going to a website. But now that people kind of know what BlazeBall is and they want to take it with them and have it adapt to their life as we're going out and about a little bit more, and that makes a lot more sense for us.
You guys, this is obviously a passion project that turned into full-time, but how do you guys make money off BlazeBall, like currently in the browser and in the future with the application?
Yeah, so the next version of the game will also have some in-app purchases for the very first time. More soon on how exactly we're approaching those, but I can tell you a little bit broadly speaking. They're entirely cosmetic, so we're not doing anything that actually affects the game. These are going to be, we've thought a lot about like what makes people excited to buy something when they go to a live event, like a real sporting event, and usually something that kind of reminds you of what you were just part of and what you got to witness. So that was kind of the framework that we used to start it off. That said, this is an experiment for us. Like it's a very, very new type of game. So we're using this time to kind of figure out what makes people excited to spend money on it so that we can continue to make more things like it.
I was gonna say, I mean, could you look at like real fantasy baseball and see how because they make money too, but I think they make money based on how much money you pull in and how good players are doing, which is something you don't really want to do because the algorithm's so algorithmy, I guess I could say.
Yeah, exactly. And we're careful in that it's a game that uses betting as a mechanic, and we really want to make sure that doesn't cross over into any of the ways that we're actually making money too. It's much more part of the theme and the mechanics, and not a thing that we're planning to monetize.
Now, Joel, you talked about earlier about how like because your game is a simulator and you don't have a ton of there are assets in your game, but that's got to be nice to be able to like add a player, add a team, or add a new mechanic without having to concept art, model the art, texture the art, light the art, rig the art, and put it in the game and get it approved by certification. Like that's got to be a really good process for you, creatively.
Absolutely. It lets us stay really, really flexible. We do like to improvise a little bit. Like we talk sometimes like we're like GMing a tabletop campaign for thousands of people at once. So often like our community will latch onto a player or a certain storyline that's coming out of the simulator, and we'll try to build some content really fast to build on that storyline. And this will happen while we're running like an era of BlazeBall Live. So we are only able to do that because the game is text-based and pretty simple visually. We can build a new mechanic and put it out there in a relatively quick amount of time compared to any other game out there. So and that improvisational nature makes it really fun for people who are engaging with us and invested in BlazeBall.
What would you say is your most ridiculous statistic in the game? You guys have a lot of them. I know there's like 40. I think he said like over 40. Someone said over 40 different like things the algorithm looks at a player.
Yeah, so players have attributes, underlying attributes, and we were reinventing them a little bit. So part of this new era is we rebuilt the simulator from scratch a little bit. But originally the player attributes were like thwackability, Shakespeareanism, ruthlessness.
Shakespeareanism, yeah.
But yeah, like omniscience, I think was one of them. The funny thing is I wrote those attributes in like day 2 of prototyping the game, and they just never changed until I was like, no one will ever see these. And they became a pretty core principle of the game.
But the sim is now like, again, like has been rebuilt from scratch, and I think is more powerful and more complex than it was. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Now, this was a passion project starting out, but now as the game's gaining popularity, has this turned into full-time work for y'all?
Very much so. So we were, 5 or 6 people when we first made BlaseBall. We're now about 27 people. As we've really built out the team, both around BlaseBall and what we think it can become. One of the things that's so unique about BlaseBall is that it's actually built on more like a website or an app, as opposed to making like a game in Unity and such, which is actually what our background was before BlaseBall. So we've hired a lot of people with backgrounds, from the tech world or from media, from all sorts, which we love to do with the game. We love to bring on people from outside of the games industry so that we can make broader, different types of experiences for more people.
What's next for BlaseBall? Like you did mention the mobile app.
Yeah, so we have a few things coming up, in the next, sometime. So the very next thing when this interview goes live is Fall Ball. So Fall Ball is a prologue event to our next era of BlaseBall. You can jump in and watch a brand new universe being formed with new and existing players. This is a really great entry point. So it's a great way to kind of get a taste of what BlaseBall is all about before the festivities begin. And then of course we're working on a new era of BlaseBall 2 that will launch alongside the mobile app. It will be on the web, of course, too. And there's a lot of new things coming in that era. One of the aspects of it that we're really excited to talk about is the structure. So in the past, we ran like one kind of long narrative arc. This one is kind of like a monster of the week format. So every week there's some new entity for fans to jump in and face off with, maybe face off with, we'll see. And we're really structuring a lot of our designs on how can we preserve what was working so well with BlaseBall and still build to something that's really exciting, but also create a format that is very welcoming. So if you miss the first few weeks and then you jump in, you're more or less at the same point as anybody else, and they can kind of get right to the action.
Joel, in a perfect world, is the eventual goal to have like actual cinematics or animations showcasing maybe certain plays or something that happens in your narrative game? Because right now it's all up to the player's imagination, but is that something you want to do in the future?
We still always want to leave a little bit of room for fans' imagination because it brings so much to the game, and it's really the core of the spirit of BlaseBall. Is letting fans imagine things and leaving a little room of a little mystery in all of the mechanics. Having said that, we're always working on, adding new exciting elements to BlaseBall, including visual elements. The new site and the new app are going to have a total new coat of paint on it. It's going to look really exciting for new and old fans. I don't know, maybe there's hidden, there's going to be some new fun visuals that people haven't seen before.
We're definitely trying to constantly just bring a deeper sense of immersion to the experience of watching BlaseBall and experiencing it, and just adding new dimension to the game.
Awesome, guys. And where can people go to find out more information about your upcoming app launch and how that's going to affect the browser game and all that good stuff? I'm assuming you guys have a Discord, a really awesome Discord or a forum and a website.
The best way is to register for Fall Ball. So at BlaseBall.com, you'll see Fall Ball there, and you can register and you can tune in for all of the events that we're hosting around it.
We all know how professional sports leagues can be pretty, finicky about their stuff. Did you guys have any legal troubles parroting baseball from the MLB? I would assume not, because it's so out there. Like, how are they going to say, like, oh, it's just like baseball? Really? Your players have 11 fingers and fight Satan on the mound, weird stuff like that?
I don't know about any. I leave that to Sam. We just threw as much in there as we could. Sam, did we?
Not yet, but here's hoping.